Good day, friends. It's Patrick here from the Urban Amish Show. I'm glad you're with me for episode 2. What you're going to hear today and see today is a conversation between my wife and I, my lovely bride of 20 years. We talked the other night. This was actually before I launched the podcast, so you'll hear us talk a little bit about what is this podcast going to be called and some of that. There's some of those decisions hadn't been made at the time that we put that episode in the can, as it were. But we talk about family dynamics. We have 4 teenage kids, and we're enjoying this stage tremendously. So we talked a little bit the other night about what kinds of things can set up the kind of family dynamics that are enjoyable and peaceful. And that's really what I want to talk about in the Urban Amish Show is what are some things that we can do in our life? What are some changes we can make, or perhaps some belief systems that we can upgrade, some mental models that we can improve? What's the value system that we need to live out in order to live the kind of life that makes life worth living forever? We're talking about, kind of habits or rhythms or patterns that you can engage in to improve your well-being. I have this thing that I love to talk about, which is living an exquisite life, right? So that doesn't mean having everything that you want. It simply means being present in your life, being present in every moment, being present with the people that you love, and making love the highest thing in your life. So we're talking about that today. I wanted to just touch on one thing, and that is on the issue of fear. There's a lot of people that I look up to that have talked about fear as it relates to developing psychologically and relationally and spiritually. So if you're seeing this, it means that I have overcome a good deal of fear. That means I have put out into the world episode 2 of the Urban Amish Show. This is an idea that's been in the back of my mind for a long time, and I'm so grateful that my wife, my loving wife of 20 years, has finally pushed me to do the thing that I have wanted to do, but been afraid to do for so long. Why was I afraid to start a podcast? Well, I don't know. I guess I was afraid of what people might think or what people might say, or that I would sound stupid, and maybe I do, but that's okay. Here's the thing, friends. Things are complicated out in the world. We've got Putin marching roughshod across Ukraine. We're seeing the kind of war that we haven't seen in the world for a long time. There's economic shocks happening everywhere. We've got inflation rising. We've got the price of food and gas and all that stuff shooting up at record rates. We've just gotten through a pandemic. We've got Putin talking about that he's threatening nuclear action. There's all kinds of instability in the world. So I think this moment that we're in America and in the rest of the world, it's important that we pull together, that we navigate to a brighter future. And I think we do that by talking to each other. I think we do that by listening to each other, holding space for each other, hearing each other, talking, figuring out. And frankly, we do it by beginning to pay attention to what's going on in our own hearts and minds and allowing that to heal so that we can put our life together and then help put our family together. And in doing so, we can heal our communities, our cities, our nation, and yes, even our world. So let's talk about what kinds of things that we can practice, what kinds of habits, relationships, and what kind of focus that we need to have in order to build the life that we want to have. So my wife MJ and I talk here. You're going to hear us riff a little bit about the podcast and some of that stuff, but enjoy this conversation with my lovely bride of 20 years. I'm looking forward to future episodes. I want to talk more about fear and other areas that we can overcome fear. One thing I will say about fear before I give you the conversation between my wife and I is I became convinced several years ago that everything that I want the most in life is on the other side of the thing that I fear the most. And that's really changed the way that I see fear, the way that I use fear in my life, the way that I notice what I'm fearful of and help use that in navigating towards what I ought to be doing. We'll talk about that in a future episode, but I just wanted to let you know that I'm grateful that you're here. I've overcome a good bit of resistance in my own life to put this podcast out into the world. And I also want to say that I'm not a professional, and before you make any changes to your life, whether that's relationally, psychologically, spiritually, nutritionally, etc., you should consult a trained and licensed professional. That's not me. We're just talking. But I think we're going to get to a brighter place if we're able to talk together. Why have you been pushing for us to start a podcast, MJ? We call her MJ around here.
Oh, that's a great question. You definitely have a gift in speaking and using your voice.
You're setting me up. High expectations.
High expectations. Well, I think there will be no disappointment there. But really, honestly, one thing that we've noticed is as our kids are getting older and as we have learned how to articulate more in our marriage, things that we are learning or loving as we're growing together, that we just sit and talk a lot. And as we talk to other people, we enjoy that kind of feedback, and it helps us make sense of ourselves. And we're realizing that when we get to talk to other people, it helps us make sense of our story, and it helps them make sense of their story. And I honestly, like, one thing that has held me back from some of this is that lie, I think, that creeps in sometimes, that you can't talk about something unless you're qualified in some way.
Yeah.
Which then isn't freedom of speech. If you have to be qualified about everything you talk about, right? Before you talk about it.
Well, there's certainly a lot of self-editing that is tempting, especially in this environment. It seems like if you say something wrong,
or something that somebody doesn't like,
or something that offends somebody,
right?
They're going to come after you or whatever. So there's this kind of hesitance to say anything. MJ and I have been married for 20 years, and we have 4 teenagers. They're here, so you may hear them. It's a rainy night in Franklin, Tennessee, so you might hear the cozy rain dropping on the windows outside. But we have, over the last 4 years, we have revolutionized our marriage and our family relationship dynamics. And so since that's happened, different people have come to us and said, hey, we'd love to talk to you about your relationship with your wife or your relationship with your kids. What are you doing to make that peaceful? What are you doing to make that thrive? And all that. So what we want to talk about today is marriage and family. Really what we want to talk about on this podcast over time is how to build an exquisite life, how to build the life that you don't want to escape from. And that's not the kind of life that is rich in money necessarily. Money doesn't buy happiness, and after a certain point, more money doesn't really solve more problems. So I'm not the guy. There's plenty of guys talking about, on podcasts about how to make more money and do all of that. Having enough money is an important part of having a good life. But I want to talk about the non-financial things that make life good, that make life not only good, but make it rich and make it exquisite, even in the suffering, right? Even when things are not going well, even when you're in a place of hard, difficult challenge, that you have the mindset and the kind of relationships around you that turn that into a life-giving thing and a strength-building thing, a generative kind of thing, rather than descend into a stressful, hellish, free-for-all or chaotic, just mess that you can't recover from, right? So we all know that there's going to be things in life that come against us. Life, there's going to be suffering. Kids are going to get sick. You're going to get sick potentially. There's going to be job loss. There's going to be relationships that are broken. There's going to be external factors. There's going to be pandemics. There's going to be economic ups and downs. There's going to be all kinds of things. But what we want to talk about on this podcast is how to create a life in your home that makes your home a peaceful oasis in the midst of all that, and a place where your kids can come home to and can unburden themselves from the problems that they ran into during the day, and where, as a husband and wife, where you can really be for each other, and where that being for each other kind of spills out into the kids, and they see that you're delighting in each other and delighting in them. And what we're saying here isn't something that we've attained perfectly, but we have attained the kind of relationships in our home that I think come about as a result of God's grace, as a result of hard work, of a result of truthful speech, a result of really careful living in some sense, although that sounds kind of boring, and our life isn't boring. But so I want to talk a little bit about, we want to riff on that a little bit. It's like, well, what makes family life rich and beautiful and peaceful, especially with teenagers and the challenges that come with that? We have been remarkably blessed to enjoy not only a great relationship with our teenagers, but even better than that, I think we have the kind of relationship that I barely dreamed to hope for. I'm sorry, I didn't say that right. I barely hoped I could. I didn't know I could dream of something like it, like how it turned out. It's that good in some ways. It's not perfect, but it's amazing. And so, what are your thoughts on how that comes about?
Well, and we hope to have the kids share here as well, because that's something that we love, is sitting around the table and hearing our teenagers' thoughts about things that are going on right now, or thoughts about things that are hard to think about as teenagers, to watch them wrestle through that. And I think that is one of the parts that make it work, is having the space where teenagers feel safe enough to wrestle with things that maybe they don't often feel the permission to wrestle with in the world. But your home is a place to be curious and to ask the questions and to say the things, and have a place where we as parents help them sort through some of that. I remember how it was to be a teenager and the questions that I had. And I was a teenager that I was curious. I had questions. I didn't always feel like I had a safe place to ask them.
Yeah, growing up in an Amish community, you weren't, like, the idea of asking a lot of questions, that wasn't really part of the program.
Now, in my home, my parents did have as safe of a place as they knew how to have. I feel like that was something that I was blessed with, is in my home, but not really in the community. But I think that's a big part of having a peaceful home. It's not that there's not hard things talked about. There are very hard things talked about, and things that are uncomfortable, or things that they don't have sorted yet. Our kids are in public school, and so there's a lot that they're taking in that we get to help them think through.
What are some of the things that kids wrestle with these days, that we want to, specifically, that you've heard our kids talk about? Let's just bring the listener in on some of those topics.
Okay. Well, our kids range from, right now, they're all teenagers right now for about 9 months. So they range from 13 to 19. So we've got 2 in high school, 1 in middle school. So let's start with the middle schooler. She literally just created her first social media account last week.
Mm-hmm.
And she put up her first post. And she talked about that afternoon, coming home from school, talked about, wow, I can see how this can be addictive. I found myself going to look to see who had liked my post, mm-hmm. who had commented. And she was like, they're so nice. It makes me want to put up another post.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to talk about how that feels good and how that can be good, but what can happen if that becomes the thing you go to, right? So some of that, social media, and how to be in a generation where they're really the first ones that are kind of navigating that at that age. I wasn't 13 with Instagram, so that's some of it.
That's a great point. And I told all of our kids that one of the things we taught them about social media is that if you are not paying for something, if you're using a platform for free, like Instagram or TikTok, then you are not the customer. You're the product, right? And so I think for the
Say
kids,
more about that.
Well, for the kids to engage, like what Instagram is selling is your attention.
Right.
Right. So your attention is the product. And we've been talking about that to the kids so that they're aware and we also have been talking about the effect, the way that the neurochemicals in their brain are impacted by looking at that Instagram feed. You see that light come up.
That dopamine.
There's a dopamine release that feels good, and it feels motivating. It feels like you've done something meaningful. But we have been talking in our home about the way that those apps are designed to hijack our dopaminergic system.
And Bridget had a taste of that this week. Like,
Yep.
It clicked for her because she had been hearing us talk about it to her older siblings. When she put that post up and she started to experience that, that's what she was saying is like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I can understand now what that is going to be like. And it doesn't mean she's going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that she's going to get it all right. But it gave her kind of this understanding, I think, of it.
And I wrestled a bit because, the data, there's some data out there now that shows that Instagram is shown to be a negative mental health influence for young women in particular. On balance, it's hard to know whether your social media engagement or presence is something that's a net negative or a net positive for you, but for young girls, it is generally considered to be a net negative. And so I wrestled with that a bit. She's been looking forward to getting Instagram from the moment, ever since her older siblings got it, and she knew that at 13 she'd be old enough legally to sign up for an Instagram account. She doesn't have TikTok or Snapchat, and she won't for a little while, but
She doesn't want it either, she said.
yeah, she's not that excited about it, but that'll change,
Yeah.
And maybe at some point she'll have them, but not at 13, in my opinion. Instagram is kind of enough to manage, but...
So that's just one example of the question that you asked.
Yeah,
Some of the
wrestling.
things that we're wrestling with. I think faith is another one. We see that right now with the older ones especially, is like wrestling through... They're at that age where, they're starting to be able to think about those things through their own lenses and the little bit of life experience that they've had. And they're starting to piece together what they've heard and what they're experiencing. And that is something that the faith piece is something that I love, that we get to see them wrestle with that, because I feel like that's something that I missed for so long, was that it's okay to wrestle with things that don't make sense that you're reading in the scripture. The Bible.
Let me give you a little background about the faith conversation for us, just so you know where we're coming from. Some of you may be familiar with the Amish, conservative group of Christians that, drive horse and buggy, dress very plain. We grew up in an Amish community in a beachy Amish church, which is on the kind of more progressive end of that Amish distribution. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, extraordinarily... faith oriented, and faith was religion was a big part of our life. Grew up going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Bible study, youth group, hymn singings, all these regular rhythms that were religious in nature.
Practices.
These practices. Our kids don't have that. We went through, and we'll talk about this on the podcast in the future, but we went through kind of a deconstruction and renovation and renewal of our faith, and the kind of renewed framework for that we don't practice that in the context of a traditional church. We don't go to church every Sunday. We have a little different rhythm, but it does kind of raise new questions about, well, how do you impart the value of what you have to the kids? How do you communicate the valuable parts of what you have in terms of your belief, your framework, your faith, your mode of being, your way of living? What are the ways for transferring that to the next generation in a way that they can embody, and in a way that is meaningful to them in their context and will serve them well? It's like, these are tough questions, especially as you go through like deconstruction, or let's say you're thinking about leaving a plain church or leaving a conservative church and going to a more progressive one, or leaving church altogether and not going to church, or whatever your kind of path is. If you have kids, it complicates it because they have these kind of rhythms that they're accustomed to, and now that's getting hijacked, and it does beg the question, like, well, was that ever true? Did that mean anything? Like, what was that about? And I think for us, being able to navigate that with our kids it hasn't been perfect, but we've been able to navigate that in a way that we're seeing the kids engage with with their faith in a way that is challenging to us. Like it challenges me in a positive way, and it's really rewarding to see them have a kind of awareness of God, awareness of their role in the larger drama that's playing out, and kind of starting to grasp like that they are loved and they're embedded in this love story, and to see their place in all of that. So that's been cool to see. But that conversation is hard. Do you have any, like, have you noticed things that work particularly well in that space or in that part of our life for the kids?
Well, right now I feel like the big one is communication, and that sounds simple. It's not as simple as it sounds, because as parents you don't have all the answers, but they're not looking for answers. They're looking for a place again to wrestle. And like Patrick said, it's so challenge. Like it inspires me and challenges me in a good way to see them kind of grab on to like a living faith for them. Like it means something to them. It's something that it's not just I love how you say, it's not just that their faith furniture is like arranged in their head in a way where it now is sorted. It's this like living, moving thing for them. And obviously the older they are, the more they can grapple with that and articulate it. But that has been super life-giving for me to be able to engage with the teenagers in that space.
Yeah, let me give the listeners an example of the kind of shift in narrative that this can involve, and how fundamental it can feel when you're starting to navigate this with your kids. If you grew up in a mainstream evangelical church, you might have heard something like the story of God with his people. It's like very high resolution, or very low resolution, very high level overview. Let's say you've got, okay, I was born onto this world a sinner, I sinned a lot, and then I was saved. I prayed this prayer and I was lifted out of sin, and I found a new identity, so that now when I reach the end of this life, I can go to heaven and be with God when I die. That some version of that is the story that I was told. Many of you were told, and so if you're told that story, like, that's the story that's easy to pass on. It's like, okay, you get to the end of your life, and then there's Judgment Day, and if you said and didn't believe the right things when you were alive, and by believe, the implication was that your mental furniture, as MJ said, was arranged properly, that you were able to articulate the right set of propositional beliefs, let's say. He's like, if that was in place, then Judgment Day would end up in you going to heaven, or if it wasn't, if you had not said the right things or believed the right things or done the right things, then you would go to hell and you would be burned forever. So that was the kind of framework. And to abandon that framework and to come to this new realization, as we have, and then communicating that new realization is like, oh, by the way, like, that's all bunk. It's like, that's not really how it works. It's like, well, okay, how do you talk about that, right? What are the rhythms for talking about it? It's like now, it's like kids, what actually seems to be happening is that we are deeply loved, and when we awaken to that love and we begin to live in that, we are saved, and we begin to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, and then
you can experience it right here, right now.
Right, and this experience of the kingdom of heaven with God in community with others goes on forever, eternally, right? And so it's a little bit different than waiting and to kind of go to heaven. Is you're living a kingdom of heaven life here.
And when you live in that way, you also, on a day-to-day basis, start to realize that if what you say you're believing or not actually is what you're saying you believe or not, because you get to experience whether you're experiencing the kingdom of heaven or not right here, right now.
Right.
Like, it's either I'm experiencing the kingdom of heaven or I'm experiencing hell on earth right now.
I think one of the things that has helped us communicate this change to our kids is by helping them pay attention and notice things that happen around us and in our lives, and kind of map that onto the story of what God's doing with his people, and go, okay, well, do you see how when you live this way that you produce something like hell in your life? Like you suffer, you cause other people to suffer. But when you live this way, when you live with love being the highest value in your life, and you love your neighbor, you even love your enemy, and you certainly need to love yourself and God, and like to live in the present awareness of love and the present experience of love in this world, like, and then begin to point out like when that's happening, or suggest where they might find and become aware of these kinds of things. It's like
they start to come home with examples.
Having a curious mind, and a mind that's open to seeing what God might be up to, rather than having a set of propositions that they're trying to bring to the world.
And trying to figure out if this friend is in or out. It's like now they're coming home and are starting to talk about when they see the kingdom of heaven in the hallways of the public school. Instead of going, oh, I'm going to navigate and I'm going to be the human in this hallway that says you're in and you're out, you're right and you're wrong. And it is a phenomenal experience to experience that with our children.
Yeah. I think, so we've talked about communicating, we've talked about building the kind of rhythms where you help them discover these truths just in day-to-day life, where you yourself pay attention to it, and then you communicate that to the kids. One of the things we do is once a week we sit down and we just spend a little time in the Bible, like in the Word. We just together as a family, we'll just spend time, we'll read a chapter, we'll talk about it, we'll pray about it, we'll discuss it, we'll talk about what kind of questions we have, what kind of curiosities we have. We study art, we do some journaling, we spend a little time in prayer, some meditative practices. So we've got a different set of kind of spiritual practices than, say, a mainstream evangelical church might. But the point of all this is to let you know, if you're deconstructing and reconstructing and renovating your faith, and you're finding yourself kind of at a loss for what do I do about faith and God in the midst of all that, especially with my kids asking questions and all that, it's okay not to know. It's okay to tell your kids that you're curious about what God is up to, that you're looking for what he's doing in your life, and that you're hopeful for what you might find, and that you don't have it all figured out. I think that's also part of the message that resonates with kids, is that, and we've done that a lot with the kids, is look, like, I don't know the answer to that. In fact, the matter is I'm an idiot when it comes to some of these things, and there's a lot of people that are better suited to tell you the answer to that than I am. It's like just a real straightforward humility about it. It's like, you know what? Great question. I don't know the answer. I'll find out, or let's find out together. That's the humility to just say that and not need to be the hero is a massive thing. So we talked about the kids, their faith. We've talked about the social media stuff. What are some other challenges that you hear the kids talking about coming home from school?
Well, there's the common ones at school, since they're at public school, like peer pressure.
I was thinking about how our youngest, being in 7th grade, there's a lot of kind of drama, like especially among the young girls. It's like, and it's been cool to hear her be able to notice that and to articulate it, to say it to us and say, hey, like, there's a lot of drama going on, you know. I've been able to, and she's able to kind of pay attention to it, notice it, but not get sucked into it.
Or sometimes say, like, I feel like I'm getting sucked into it. What is something that I can do to kind of get back out of this? Yeah. And
really creating kind of a safe place for them, like if they do screw up, if they mistreat somebody, or if they just screw up by falling into that kind of drama and back and forth and all that stuff. It's like, it's safe to unpack that, and unpacking that with a curious mind, like not bringing to the situation what you've already figured out went wrong, but like, let's see if we can figure out what went wrong,
right?
You know,
right.
And let's just talk about it, which kind of leads me to this idea of they may even be able to talk to you about things that they've done wrong and they know they've done wrong, right? And that brings up this idea of confession, which we'll talk about this in a future episode, but there's this idea in the Bible that confession leads to
metanoia, or
a new way of thinking,
right?
That there's this thing called confession, that if you engage in confession, the Christian teaching is that it leads you to repentance, is the language in the Bible, which is this idea that you can change the way that you think. And so that's useful to know, by the way. It's like that there is a mechanism or a way that we can change the way that we think, and to teach the kids too that what you're thinking right now and the way that I'm thinking may not be sufficient. It may be flawed. I may need to update it. In fact, the likelihood is very high that I need to update my thinking. And so what's the process for that? Well, is to engage in confession. And to that confession doesn't necessarily have to start out with, I've done something wrong, although the fact that we're all human, likelihood is high that we have done something wrong. But being able to just talk about these things without bringing shame and fear and punishment to the table, and just going, well, let's just unpack and like what actually did happen. Like, so were you actually vaping in the bathroom? You know, and talking about some of those things, and that allows them to begin to talk. And tell me a little bit about your thoughts on confession, because you've really changed our family, I feel like, in this area, or your take on this has been a huge blessing to us.
Should I go into it now, or should we say, okay?
I mean, we'll talk about the story that led to it later in another episode.
Well, and I had a friend who actually introduced me, I think, there was a friend who introduced to me kind of the idea of looking at confession as something to celebrate instead of something to shame or be afraid of. And we've kind of adopted that in our family. And the reason being is when we have the ability to confess something, and like you said, it doesn't have to start with, I did something wrong. But if I have a place, let's just use you and I in our relationship. If I have something that I have become aware isn't serving me well, right? And I have a place in you that I can come and say, hey, and talk about something. Now it's in the light. Now it holds no power because it's exposed. And even if I haven't already conquered it or figured it out or, sorted it in a way, it's not going to hold power anymore because it's now in the light. Like, the thing of being in the dark is actually the food for whatever needs to be confessed. So if I keep something in secret, that in and of itself it's food.
It feeds the
secret,
the darkness.
right? The dark part of it. So as soon as I talk about something and bring it up, so let's use something in the kids like the peer pressure thing, and vaping right now is a big thing at school or whatever, So if that's something that they have done and are feeling shame around, but they decide to come and talk to us about it, that doesn't mean they're never going to be tempted to try it again. That doesn't mean that they'll never try it again. But in talking about it, it doesn't hold power anymore because it's something that's now out. It's talked about, and it gives them the opportunity to think about it differently because they've engaged with community, with other people, and have, it gives them that chance to change the way they think about it and have other people talk about it. So it's way more powerful, and a lot less shameful than I used to feel confession was. Like, I would feel like if I confess something, it would become an identity that now it would be like this red mark that was against me and that everybody would now hold against me, and that's not what it's meant.
Like, you've screwed up this way, and so
right, and so now this says something about you, and it means something about you, and that's not what confession is intended to be for. And I think.
So how does that play out? Like, one of the things that you've said that I love is that you said in this home we celebrate confession. So when one of the kids brings something to us, or if one of us brings something to the other one where it was like, hey, I have wronged you, I've screwed up, whatever, I've done the wrong thing here, and then we say what that is, and it comes down to confession is a part of truthful speech, and truthful speech is. I'll probably talk about truthful speech in every podcast episode that I do, because it's literally the fundamental element of life in some way. It's like, to live, you need to speak truthfully, or else things just fall apart. And I know this from experience. But confession
has a creative force behind it.
Yes, it's you're aligning. When you speak truthfully, you literally are bringing about, out of the potential of what could be, you're bringing about the kind of order that you want in your life, the kind of peaceful order that you want. You're specifying exactly what it is that you believe should be in life, right? And so there's a creative element to it. Confession is using your words to align who you have been with reality. And there's one thing that I've learned in 45 years, and that is that as much as you can, you want to be aligned with what's real, right? You don't want to be chasing after things that are not real, or falsehoods, or you don't want to tear holes in the fabric of reality around you. You can fall through those holes, and if you've ever been upside down in life, well, it's reasonable to think, I'm curious if I had anything to do with creating an upside down situation for myself. Did I, was I careless with what I said and what I did? Did I live or speak in a way that wasn't true, And so confession's all a part of that, truthful speech, and aligning the reality of who you've been with what's true and real, so that you can better map yourself, map where you're going, and change your mind to be able to better perceive what is true and real, and to align yourself with it, right? And so the more that you can do that, the more that you'll become who it is that you were created to be. It's great to see the kids engage in that. It's rewarding to engage in it as for us. And I think that whole confession element of celebrating confession, and we do, like, if somebody brings something difficult, it's like we work through it, we talk about it, and then, like, we go get ice cream, or we go get tacos, or we go get, it's like we celebrate when we celebrate doing the hard thing, right? And that's been just a massive kind of, I think, positive element in terms of the relationship with the teenagers and helping them set their course in life.
And I think as parents, we have such a responsibility in helping our teenagers speak truthfully. I know sometimes it's tempting when you find something out, or you may have a kind of a clue about something going on, to just kind of pretend that it's not there, or to sweep it under the rug, to save face, really, honestly, as parents, right? And it reminds me of that kids book that I have on my grandma bookshelf. I have a little book section for my grandbabies, because my kids are
future grandbabies.
Yeah, my future grandbabies, because they're books that I want to keep from the children. And one of them is the book about Billy and the Dragon, and how his mom refused to acknowledge when he talked about his dragon. And the story is really an overarching story about confession, and how when we don't, the monsters in our life, and how when we don't confess, they grow. And all it takes is confession. And everybody around little Billy allowing that confession to be exactly that, and to go and help him through that. And I think it ends by saying we all can live with a dragon the size of a mouse or something. It's it doesn't mean that you'll never have dragons, but when you have a place to talk about the dragons and to really articulate about them and have people to come alongside, they're manageable. Mm-hmm. You can learn, you can work your way through it. So as parents, we really do have a responsibility, I think, to have that place for teenagers.
One of the other responsibilities that I think we have is to do the work, to kind of figure out our own crap, so that we're not triggered when our kids bring their stuff to us, right? When the kids bring stuff, and I know this from experience too, because it hasn't always been like this for me, but being able to know that I'm true and grounded and aligned when it comes to my inner life and my thoughts and my sexuality and my who I am inside and out. It's all of that. When I know that that's free and true and clear, then I can talk to my kids about sex and sexuality and all of that stuff without being triggered, or without having fear, or without having shame, because I've processed those feelings
and those shadow parts,
the darker parts, the ways that, I've failed, I've messed up. And a lot of times we're tempted to just react out of that. I've messed up. It's do the work, move through that, figure out how it is you messed up, speak the truth, put yourself back together, and then become somebody who can help your son or daughter lay a solid foundation for their life, rather than cause them to, or rather than you being someone who, just kind of avoids, or
like you said, is triggered.
Yeah, gets triggered, and brings up things like shame or judgment or whatever when your kids are trying to talk about this stuff. I think that's important. All right, what else in terms of the kids? Is there, I think one of the things that, in terms of sibling relationships, I think that's another thing that we've talked about, that the kids have mentioned. One of the things that the kids have mentioned as being different from how they think that their peers are experiencing life, or different from how they witness their peers experience their families a lot of times, is our 4 kids are pretty close. They get along well, and they have a great relationship with each other, and
they still know how to get under each other's skin and tease each other and even fight, but they're for each other.
Absolutely.
They're for each other, and and it
creates a peaceful environment in our home where we can enjoy being together in a car for 12 hours. We can enjoy a screen-free Sunday at home, playing games, and we can and do enjoy camping, hiking, going to a waterfall, adventuring together across the whole age range, and doing all of that together in a way that's super awesome and exciting and life-giving and all those stuff, everything that you want it to be. What are some things that you think have helped build that relationship between the 4 kids?
That's a kind of a hard thing for me to answer. You may have better answers for that than I do. I know that both you and I have great relationships with our siblings, so I think it's an example that they see as well, which doesn't really give you an answers to like how or why that happens. Again, I do think as parents there is some responsibility here for us in that, like, I never will peg or compare the kids against each other. Our kids are very unique and very different from each other. They're siblings, so there's some similarities, but they have different giftings, they have different interests. Even, the boys are tucked into the middle, the girls are kind of the bookends, and right now they're playing the same sport, but they're still very unique and different. And having a home where you celebrate each other's differences, you call them out. In our kids, there's some who learn very differently than others. And we homeschooled for a while, so I got to see that firsthand. There's some that are going to test better and look like better students at school than others. And we want to celebrate the ones that, get the high grades, but also know how to celebrate the things in the others that may not have as high grades, like what's good about them. And I think those small little things, when they see you do that, they learn how to celebrate that in each other and how to be for each other. Again, they have things that they're like, that they tease each other about, and they can squabble as well, but sure. They really do. They do enjoy it. Like you said, they enjoy being together. They enjoy talking about things together. They don't escape from each other. And going on vacation, they enjoy, through the age ranges, they enjoy being together, and it doesn't seem like they feel like they are looking down at their younger siblings or can't relate to their older siblings. And I don't know. I don't really know exactly why that is.
One of the things that I think has been helpful is nurturing a sense of a kind of a mindset of abundance, where if I have something or if he has something, it doesn't mean that there's less for me necessarily. It's like I can celebrate your wins, you celebrate mine, we all celebrate each other's wins. We're here for each other if somebody's hurting or is falling behind in some way. I think just nurturing that mindset that the world is not a world of lack. This is a universe of abundance, and just living that mindset of abundance in life. It's like, don't look through the lens of, there's less for me if somebody has something more than I do. If somebody has higher grades, that doesn't mean anything about me. It doesn't mean anything negative about me.
Right.
There's things that I bring to the table. We can celebrate that. And, so that has been helpful, I think, that mindset, and also just teaching that, embodying that, and reinforcing that day to day. But then also, I think, reinforcing this idea that of treating, of like, well, you mentioned it already. You said the homeschooling was a big part of it for us, whereas like we're gonna have fun together. Like, just the fact that there's how big an age difference between
6 years from oldest to youngest.
Oldest and youngest, like it doesn't really. This idea that you have to be stratified by age, socially, like that's not the way that humans work generally. That's just the way that school works. And
right.
So being able
true.
to break through that and go like, hey, we're going to have a great, and part of that for you as a parent, I think, is you're seeing your youngest and engaging with them but kind of a little bit above their level. You're seeing them, you're really paying attention, and you're helping them engage with, someone who's more developed than they are. The older kids, I think, learning how to let go of the kind of management of their life and let them have more of it. As you still, I see you, I love seeing you engage with life. I love seeing you wrestle with life, and let's talk about these things. And I honor you to make more and more decisions and choices, as you grow up and are able to. I think it helps them see the beauty of each developmental stage, experience the beauty of it maybe, and not look down as they look across the age ranges
Right.
at their siblings. It's like we generally do see this kind of peaceful, fun environment across the age ranges,
Right.
which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the kids hear me say all the time that humans they're the greatest creation in the whole world. And that doesn't mean that it's adults only. Like, people are amazing, and teach your kids to see humans just where they're at, like face value. It doesn't matter if it's a special needs kid or if it's, somebody who is someone they aspire to be, like for Ben, like looking up at the seniors who are varsity players and like engage with people no matter where they're at. If it's somebody that's older that you would love to have as a mentor, or somebody who may be younger who looks up to you as a mentor, be able to engage with those people and see them for who they are. And that definitely comes into play then in the home as well, and with siblings and cousins and family members, neighbors, like outside. I love when the boys are playing basketball and there's a bunch of little boys that might come run along, and instead of just like shooing them away or not paying attention, they'll throw them a ball and help them make a basket or whatever. It's like learning how to be in society across the age ranges is such a gift. But it seems like it does need to be either taught or showed by example.
Yeah.
Because like you said, in the school, like they're in a room with kids their age and they become very used to that and want to just be with kids their age if they're not kind of taught it, I think.
Yeah. Well, this has been a good episode talking about the kind of the dynamics with the teenagers, and there'll be more of that in future episodes. I think we're also in future episodes going to talk about the dynamics between husband and wife. Mm-hmm. What creates an exquisite marriage, what creates the kind of marriage that would be worth being married for hundreds of years, and
we plan to do that, don't we?
Of course, and repeating over and over again if that were an option. But
hey, who knows?
We'll talk about that, and send us some questions if you have any. What kind of things are you wrestling with or struggling with or have questions about as you either raise teenagers or engage in a relationship with your husband or wife, or
even are on your faith journey,
and
I really hope you get to talk some about like even just how you see the world and what you see in the world and how you see yourself in the world, and that sort of awareness as well. I think we'll probably kind of leave this open-ended as far as what we talk about, right? Because it's our platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we get to talk about whatever we want to talk about.
I think you'll learn more in the future, but several years ago, I woke up to the fact that there was so much of life that I was not living, and that is both a blessing and a curse, because, well, the blessing is you begin to pay attention to the fact that there's more to life that you didn't realize. There's this whole new part of life that I didn't even know existed. The spiritual life, the abundant life, the exquisite life, the kingdom of heaven, the life that makes life worth living forever. And I would say awakening to God's love for me has changed me in a way, in many ways, and it's changed our family too. And so that's one of the things we want to talk about. And if you're going through kind of a faith journey or deconstruction of your faith journey, tune in. We're going to talk more about that because we've undergone quite a bit of that ourselves and have come out and are coming out. I don't want to say that, and I don't want to act like we've arrived at some destination. We haven't. We're on a journey with you.
We're just inviting you in on this journey is probably about the best way to put it.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So make love the highest thing in your life and live an exquisite life. I hope to see you soon again.